Welcome to The Daily. I'm Niall Paterson, and today, we're focusing on the worsening situation in Sudan. Over the weekend, British diplomatic staff and their families were evacuated from the region. Yet, perhaps as many as 4,000 British passport holders remain in the country. And the Foreign Secretary has said the government's ability to help is severely limited until the conflict ends. Yet there is precious little chance of that happening as the violence escalates between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary group the Rapid Supply Forces, or RSF, who actually fought alongside Sudanese forces in the coups of 2019 and 2021. So far, the advice to Brits has been to stay out of sight indoors. But other countries, including France and Germany, have managed to get both their diplomats and other nationals out of Sudan. Short of a long, dangerous journey to the Egyptian border, there is little the 4,000 British nationals can do but sit, wait, and presumably pray. I'm going to be speaking about the lack of an active evacuation plan with our Defence and Security editor, and to one woman whose family, including her daughters aged just 5 and 2, are desperate to flee the country.
Yes, they were terrified because the house just behind them was hit by a bomb, but they can hear the gunfires and they can hear the bombs from inside the house.
But first, our Africa correspondent Yousra Elbagir is in Djibouti, a country several hundred miles outside of Sudan, but where planes transporting foreign nationals out of the capital, Khartoum, continue to land. Look, Yousra, are any British passport holders outside of the diplomatic staff, are they getting out of the country at the moment? I mean, what are those that remain actually telling you?
They're trapped. They feel trapped. We spoke to a head teacher of a school who was incredibly frustrated. He said that him and his fellow Brits were, using every swear word under the sun to express their frustration. He's from Coventry, and him and his wife went out there to teach. We've spoken to dual nationals who've literally, come to Sudan just to see their family. One NHS clinical psychologist went to Sudan for a funeral and is now trapped there. And she says that 100 NHS doctors are currently trapped in Sudan at the moment, and they're not receiving help from the embassy. But it's been very clearly indicated that dual nationals, Sudanese Brits, will be at the bottom of the pile when civilians, British citizens, are finally evacuated.
How do we know this? And in what way has this been indicated that they will be the last to be rescued?
Some have said that they've received that from the embassy. And I will just say, Neil, we're waiting to get evidence on what exactly was said to them. But the testimonies that people are sharing online is that the embassies basically told them, don't hold your breath. And that they should just, that they won't be, when it does finally happen, they shouldn't expect that they'll be evacuated.
So it's certainly the case that it is not just Britain that is having issues getting people out of the country. By the same token, however, isn't it the case that other countries have managed to extract their civilians along with their diplomatic staff at the same time?
Definitely. The French have managed to evacuate large numbers of foreign nationals that include dual citizens. There are other nationals from across Africa as well as across the EU that have been evacuated by the French. The Italians are also evacuating non-Italian foreign nationals. There's been kind of a more integrated approach, I would say, from Italy and France than what we've seen from the UK. And I think it's important to mention that the US also focused on their diplomatic staff and only evacuated their embassy personnel and their dependents.
Yousra, you mentioned that there has been not a complete cessation of violence in Sudan, but the tempo appears to have dropped. Now that significant numbers of foreign nationals have left the country, not Brits, of course, but significant numbers of other foreign nationals, are we to expect the violence to tick back up again?
That's what's expected. That's the fear. The fear is that this sort of illusion of cooperation will cease as soon as they are no longer feeling responsible or that they will be held accountable. And I think this speaks to the impunity that we've seen over the last few years and the enablement by the international community in mediation efforts. So the feeling now is that they've just been left by the wayside. Both dual nationals and Sudanese civilians are making the perilous journey to the border, to Egypt, to the eastern border, to Ethiopia, and trying to get themselves out.
You mentioned on a podcast around about a week ago, Yousra, that you have family that were there and that were caught up in all of this. I'm wondering how they're doing.
My parents are still there, and they're elderly, and they do not feel comfortable to make the journey. It's not an easy journey. It takes people, you know, a full day of travel to Egypt, and there's a lot of reports of abductions, looting, killing on the road. My parents don't feel comfortable. We've tried to persuade them, but unfortunately, it's a choice that people have to make. These are people who are leaving everything. We don't have a welfare system in Sudan that provides social housing. So the houses that we see that are destroyed and looted are people's generational homes that they've built brick by brick. And so to leave is an impossible decision, and to stay is an impossible decision. And that's what people are currently facing.
Tell me just a little bit more about that exit route, the dangers that people are fearing. Reports of people getting abducted, getting killed. I mean, I can understand why your parents wouldn't want to leave their home.
Yeah, it's terrifying, especially if you're not able-bodied, if you are unwell, if you're elderly, and if you're super young. There's been a lot of advice for people to travel in big groups. There's been a massive community initiative, people all over the Sudanese community, all over the world, working lines. We had someone helping us get family out who we don't even know. I just got sent her number and we called her, and her name is Mesa. She's in Saudi Arabia, and she's just been bashing phone lines, trying to find a secure route for some of our neighbors and the people that we know. Everyone's banding together because this is just so dangerous. People are being, if a car looks nice, they'll just take it. If people look vulnerable, or they have money, or they have any sort of indication of even just political affiliation, if you've been an activist over the last few years, then you've got a target on your back. So the routes are just almost impossible to travel, but people have no choice.
Indeed. Just to return to the kind of the 4,000 or so British passport holders that we think are still in Sudan, the Foreign Secretary has been very, very clear. I mean, he has said that the UK is severely limited in its ability to help British nationals until the conflict ends. I mean, from your perspective, do you think that there is any chance that we will see mass evacuations of British passport holders, given the level of violence and given what the Foreign Secretary has just said?
It doesn't look great, Neil. I have to say, it looks like if you're an EU citizen, if you're from, Ireland, if you're from France, if you're from Italy, you have a better chance of being evacuated than if you're a Brit. And people are incredibly sad about that. And Sudan, you have to remember, Sudan is a former British colony. There's a reason that there are so many Brits in Sudan. There's a reason why there are so many Sudanese Brits and so many Sudanese people in the UK. There's a responsibility here that is historical. And there should be safe passage through back and forth from the UK, just given the history and given the fact that Sudan sees itself in many ways as a former colony and suffers from the repercussions of being a former colony, even in its lack of state building and its lack of economic development today.
With the country beginning to experience shortages of vital medicine, food and water, many will surely be considering attempting to flee. But a series of ceasefires have failed to hold. The violence continues, and the road out is dangerous indeed. Dr Shaza Faycal is in London, but her family has been trapped in Sudan.
It was terrifying for my eldest daughter. She's 5 years old. The first day she couldn't sleep out of terror. My mother had to tell her that these people are just doing some training, military training, but we are safe and nothing will happen to us. Sadly, she had to lie because my daughter was terrified from what she was hearing. My youngest, who's 2 years old, was again terrified every time she hears the sound. My 5-year-old is, if she hears us talking about anything, she would get terrified. So she had to go somewhere where they couldn't hear us to tell me about the situation. For 2 days, they had no electricity at all. I'm sorry, These were really stressful times talking to them.
Shaza's family have French nationality, so as the conflict worsened, her mother, brother and 2 young daughters fled the family home with their belongings to make a dangerous journey to the French embassy in the hope of getting out.
That's where the hard part is. Moving from where they were to the French embassy was quite dangerous. They had to go through streets and there's open fire. Although there should be some ceasefire at the moment to get the foreign nationals out, I've lost contact with them since the moment they've left until they've reached the French embassy hours and hours later.
They did make it to the embassy after hours of agonising pain for Shaza. But the pain continues as she waits for further information about their safety. The last she heard, they were due to be on a flight, but when we spoke to her, she hadn't had any information for more than 12 hours. How are you feeling right now? We are in a horrible, horrible moment, I suspect, for you, assuming that they are on their way to safety, but not having that confirmed. I'm just wondering how you're coping, Shaza.
I'm quite stressed. I was working and taking my thoughts off what's happening to my family in Sudan. Last night I've had about, I would say, 3 hours of sleep. Just because I've been up for more than 30 hours in a row and I couldn't get any sleep prior to this. And literally after 3 hours I was just awake, looking at my phone, making phone calls, trying to see if they've contacted anyone. I still don't have any information where they are or whether they've actually made it to safety or not.
And we will of course update you as to Shaza's situation. The Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Supply Forces fought side by side in the coups of 2019 and 2021, but the relationship has since soured, and there are long-standing disagreements over how the country should be run, which has led to the violence. I spoke to our Defence and Security Editor Deborah Haynes just before lunchtime on Monday the 24th of April. Since then, a team of British troops have flown into a port in eastern Sudan, some distance from the capital, on what we're told is a reconnaissance mission.
There's always a plan. There are lots of plans. The problem is there's no decision. So the military has been has had its eyes on the escalating violence and the deteriorating safety situation in Khartoum for a number of weeks, not just days. They would have been looking at all sorts of different options to get British nationals out. It's an incredibly difficult situation. The location is hard because we don't have bases around the region as countries like France and the US do. They've both got bases in Djibouti, which is a few hundred miles from Sudan, but that's a lot better than anything that we've got. And so the logistics is incredibly hard. Sudan is a very big country, and also there's a war going, there's conflict going on. So there are loads of checkpoints. There are armed soldiers from both sides. It's very, very dangerous. But yes, lots of plans, but no decisions.
So I presume that for the time being, at least, the advice is what? Just to stay indoors and wait for a call from the FCO?
I mean, clearly that advice cannot hold. The only choice they've got has been to stay at home, but clearly doing that isn't a plan because water's running out, electricity's pretty much non-existent. They're going to have to get out somehow. They can't just keep staying there. And so that's what you're seeing, these unilateral decisions by people to get on other means of transport out. But I imagine the pressure is really mounting on the Foreign Office today to do more, to give a better plan to get people out. And then there are also questions about taking all the diplomats out and leaving British nationals in. Of course, other countries are doing the same. So clearly, there's a wider consideration here about what is genuinely practical and safe. And the decision was clearly taken that the diplomats in the embassy that were there couldn't perform their function because of the security situation.
Is there a solid piece of evidence that suggests that the militiamen were going to be targeting foreign diplomats working in the country? Because otherwise, if I were a British passport holder watching the ambassador, the diplomatic staff get evacuated from the country, but I'm still there, I might be slightly less sympathetic than you just were.
It is the case that the embassy and the location of the embassy and where the diplomatic staff were living is literally in the middle of the two warring factions. So it's true that they were in a difficult position. And I think if they're clearly, it's not an embassy that's a sort of a military base, so they can't defend themselves. And so there was definitely the risk. I mean, in all of the briefings about this from the government, they specifically said that there's been evidence of a escalating threat or a threat against diplomatic missions. We know, for example, that the British Council building, there was reports of it being looted after the officials from the council moved home. They left that building, and so I think there is some legitimacy there. But clearly, the whole city is a dangerous place to be, and so it's going to be slim comfort.
What, if anything, then is your best guess as to how we will get British nationals out of the country, given all the problems that you've mentioned?
Well, I think if a decision is taken that we have to get the British nationals out, and keeping that policy of stay in shelter is no longer viable, then clearly it's going to be an operation that the British will be doing alongside international allies. And so you can imagine for the Ministry of Defence, they'll be looking at the possibility again, maybe, of trying to get an aircraft into the airfield that they used at the weekend, which is just north of Khartoum, again trying to get people out of the city. That is very high risk. It's what they did to get the diplomats out, but if they wanted to do that again to get British nationals out, that's a high risk move, but it can be done. They've proven that it can be done. The other alternative is to try to get people to one of Sudan's borders, maybe on the coast, have a ship there, get a Royal Navy warship, and anything that they do, they'll be doing it in coordination with European countries, France, Germany, for example, as well, and also the United States and others, because they're all in this dilemma together. And clearly other countries have decided to get their nationals out, not just their diplomats. That's not a good look for the UK.
All of which takes us surely straight back to Afghanistan again. I mean, the head of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has been saying this morning, look, people have not been communicated with appropriately. We haven't got a plan in place. We have not learnt the lessons from Afghanistan. I mean, how true is that from your perspective?
I mean, it's very true. Here we are again with a crisis situation, with the Foreign Office seemingly doing all it can, but it has only limited resources. I really think this is a reflection of the erosion in funding and capability at the heart of the UK's key ministries, in particular the Foreign Office. It's been reduced over time in terms of size and influence. And as well as that, of course, the armed forces, they've been massively shrunk too. And it means that your options just shrink along with that. And there just hasn't, it seems, been enough foresight in place to think about this potentially coming. And then even when it blew up literally a week and a half ago, it seems that it was the military that had the plans, but the Foreign Office that was quite slow. And you're left in this situation where yet again British nationals are stuck in a conflict zone with no way out. In Afghanistan, the difference there was that there was a relatively permissive environment. The Taliban, as you'll remember, had given the British and the US and the others just under 3 weeks to get their people out. They had an airfield to do that. In Sudan, they do not have these permissions. You have to work very hard in order to get permission to land aircraft in an airfield that's not guaranteed to be defended. There's reports that one of the French convoys came under fire yesterday. It is high risk. It's not a permissive environment. There isn't a British military footprint on the ground. So it's just very, very different. So you can't compare exactly, but you can say that yet again, it doesn't seem that there was a lot of pre-planning going on for this potential eventuality, which is now just blown up in everybody's faces.
My thanks to Yousra Elbagir, Dr Shaza Faycal, Deborah Haynes, and of course to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson. This edition was produced by Emma Ray Woodhouse and Alex Eden. Our editor is Philly Beaumont.